warm greeting to all of our alumni, students, colleagues and friends who are watching from across the globe. My name's Craig Rutherford and I'm a Development Officer in the Development and Alumni team. If this is your first Saints Talk, then thanks very much for joining us. Our Saints Talks are a series of short presentations by leading members of our academic community on key areas of their world-leading research. It's a little flavour of the expertise that our lucky students get to see on a daily basis. This evening's talk will be given by Dr. Marcel Lukas from our brand new University of St Andrews Business School. The talk will last about 30 minutes and then Dr. Lukas will be happy to field your questions. We'll aim to wrap the event up by 6:15 at the latest, so do please get your questions in early if you'd like to ask anything. You can ask a question by adding that to the chat bar on your screen. Before we get into it, I'd just like to do a quick plug for the next talk in the series. We've got a really varied schedule of talks extending throughout the academic year, and the next one will be presented by Dr. Julie Oswald, who works in both the School of Biology and our world-renowned Scottish Oceans Institute, which many of our alumni will know under its previous incarnation as the GATI. The talk will be called Can You Hear Me Now? Using Sound to Study Marine Mammals Around the World, and that will go out on Tuesday the 27th of May. You can also access the full archive of Saints Talks on a range of subjects from bird migration to tackling COVID on our dedicated St Andrews Alumni YouTube channel, where this talk will be available in the coming days. Before that though, let's get back to this evening's topic at hand and tonight's guest. Dr. Marcel Lukas is Vice Dean of Executive Education and Senior Lecturer in Banking and Finance at the University of St Andrews Business School. His research focuses on consumer financial decision-making, financial technology, and financial education, particularly the behavioural factors influencing spending and saving. Dr. Lukas is also a fellow at the Office for National Statistics and an advisor to government bodies and financial regulators. He is also the academic lead on our brand new suite of executive education programmes, which are being delivered collaboratively by the business school and a network of partners, focused on areas such as finance, leadership, dealing with conflict, and of course, business applications for generative AI. There's more information about this available on our business school website. In this talk, Dr. Lukas will explore the implications of generative AI for the future of work and education, such as what opportunities and challenges arise when AI tools become more integrated into professional and educational settings. Dr. Lukas will then provide practical insights into how generative AI is transforming the ways that we work, learn, and make decisions, drawing from his research in financial technology, behavioural economics, and policy engagement. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Marcel for this evening's talk.
Thank you so much, Craig, for that very kind introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today to examine how generative AI is transforming the way we work and learn. And I see we have a huge number of attendees today, which just shows there's so much interest in this topic. But that also means we probably not have time, or I have not enough time to answer all the questions that will come up. So if you want to continue our conversation beyond the session, I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn or follow up via email. I'd be delighted to hear from you and continue this conversation beyond the talk today. So what are we going to just cover and discuss today? First of all, I want to do a bit of a brief overview of generative AI and really compare generative AI to agentic intelligence, a term that's coming up quite a bit in the last couple of months. Then I will talk about assessing strategic value and delivery risks when it comes to implementing these tools in your organization, and what it means to reimagine leadership, work, and research workflows using these kinds of tools. Then I will discuss how all of this really shapes the work that we're doing in executive education. And I, these days, really often refer to having one of the coolest jobs in higher education at the moment, being able to build executive education for the University of St Andrews, which is just an absolute honor and a privilege, and a lot of fun too. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. First of all, what is a large language model? What is a chatbot? What is generative AI? And we hear all of these terms all the time. And I think there's quite a bit of confusion often around these. So Today, I don't want to go into too much technical detail, but what I want to do is to distinguish between artificial intelligence as a whole concept. And we will really not go into too much detail there, but really focus on the generative AI and agentic AI part. And many of you will have used some of these tools, right? And these logos represent 4 of the biggest models: ChatGPT by OpenAI, Claude by Anthropic, Gemini by Alphabet, and Microsoft Copilot. And those tools have been around for only about 2 years and have really changed how we work. The first thing I want to do is distinguish between generative AI and agentic AI. So when it comes to those two, they really represent 2 distinct AI paradigms. Generative AI creates content on demand with limited memory, enhancing the way we work, but it's very reactive, requiring prompts for each response. And these tools like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini are probably some of the most popular ones. What it is really, it is a fancy next word prediction machine. So it really just works by using a lot of training data of whatever is in the internet and available. And there are lots of problems with that I am aware of, but we will not go into too much detail on those today. But in the effect, it's really just predicting the next word. So really what you have on your phone sometimes when you type a message and it suggests the next word. That's what a chatbot, a generative AI chatbot is doing. But obviously, on a scale that was not imaginable 3-4 years ago. Agentic AI, however, on the other hand, plans and acts autonomously with persistent memory that learns from interaction. It really deeply integrates with external systems and really automates entire workflows. And it's continuing to evolve through the use. So the key distinction really is generative AI, on the one hand, responds to requests, while agentic AI independently pursues goals with minimal human guidance, really representing a shift from reactive to proactive AI behavior that has significant implications for businesses, for education, for how we learn and how we teach and how we work. Today, I will show you quite a few graphics, and whenever they are created by AI, I will let you know. So this one, for example, was created by ChatGPT 3. Okay, so how can we understand what is possible with AI models? And one of the first papers that really explored this by Ethan Mollick and colleagues was talking about the jagged AI frontier. And this was a really interesting study they did together with the Boston consulting groups, and it involved hundreds of consultants using ChatGPT. So what they discovered is there seems to be a knowledge frontier or an AI frontier. And what they mean by that is that the AI models are really good at certain things, but really bad at other things. And as humans, we wouldn't be able to distinguish between those. So often tasks that seem equally difficult to us as humans may not be equally difficult for an AI model. And what they found in that paper was really interesting. They found that AI really excels at certain tasks like creative writing, data analysis, and creative and persuasive content. They found that AI increased quality and productivity, and even complex knowledge work could be significantly improved when the tasks were inside this jagged AI frontier. However, if it wasn't, AI can really struggle unexpectedly with seemingly straightforward tasks. And there were lots of these in the news. For example, AI was really bad at counting the R's in strawberry or adding 2 plus 2. So in the study, the consultants using AI for tasks outside the frontier were less likely to get correct answers. And what was interesting, though, was the quality of presentation still improved. So it made errors more convincing. And this has lots of implications for knowledge work. And the frontier is really rapidly evolving. So what AI couldn't do yesterday, it may excel at tomorrow. And understanding this AI and this jagged frontier is really vital for organizations, but also for knowledge workers. And discovering that on a daily basis is really necessary because these models are evolving so quickly. What this study also found is we are not seeing a replacement of knowledge workers, but really a transformation on how they work. And this was one of the first really large-scale studies and kind of set the scene for a lot of the work in this space. Another summary, also done by Ethan Mollick and colleagues, was around the 4 principles of working with AI. And this is really one of the key frameworks that I think is super important to share with you today. Is there are 4 things that you should probably be considering when you're working with these kinds of AI agent and general artificial intelligence. So first principle is really always invite AI to the table. So whenever you have a task in your workplace, consider if you can share that task with a Gen AI model. If your company or your organization lets you do that safely and securely, obviously. However, remain the human in the loop. There are still things we as humans excel at, and we need to remain in that conversation with the AI. All the studies so far found that the combination of AI plus human is usually much better than AI alone or human alone in terms of productivity, in terms of quality, and so on. However, and that is really interesting, if you treat an AI like a person, the AI models often perform much better. Lastly, assume that the AI you're using today is likely the worst version of AI you will ever be using. There is so much progress in this space. And whenever I give talks like this, I am just so excited about everything that's happening in this space. And I have to adapt and adjust my slides every other day because there's just so much happening and so much progress is being made. So this jagged frontier is constantly evolving, and it's important for the workforce and for educators and for students to really understand that only by doing they will really understand where this frontier lies. Okay, so that's really about generative AI. But now the question is, why is everyone talking about these AI agents? Why is this such a big deal now compared to generative AI? We are only really digesting generative AI, and now the next big thing is happening. And there are really 3 fundamental concepts that are different for agentic AI compared to generative AI. And I won't go into the details of that lovely bar chart that Anthropic created on the right-hand side here. But there are really 3 keystones of agents. First, it's action. The ability of those agentic AIs to execute real-world tasks. And that can be digital or physical tasks. And this really is what transforms AI from an advisor to an actor. Agents can interact with applications. They can manipulate data, control hardware, and execute real tasks to achieve specific goals. The second part is reasoning. So the decision-making capabilities for complex problems. So unlike generative AI, which simply responds to a prompt, it's responsive, agents can break down the task, develop a plan, and then assess different options and say, well, this could be an option, but no, I'd rather go down that route. So you can really visualize the thought process these tools have. And this enables also them to handle unpredictable situations and adapt their approach based on the circumstances they find in the data. And the third one's memory. So it's really about persistence and learning over time. Agents build expertise through accumulated experience, adapting and optimizing their behavior. And this creates kind of a compound intelligence advantage where early adopters and organizations that have been using this kind of tools and have the data structure in place can benefit from faster agent training and development. So, and this combined really can change how we perceive work, how we understand workflows in an organization, but also how we understand organizational structures. And there's a very interesting theory in the literature, and it's called the Doctor Strange theory of AI agents, and it refers to Doctor Strange in the Avengers movie, where Doctor Strange plays out millions of possible options. And it's really about breaking away from a one-to-one replacement thinking. So at the moment, what I see in lots of organizations when I talk to participants in our classes is the current mindset is, okay, I have this one agent that replaces one human task. So for example, you want to write social media posts and you create now this social media writer agent that does some research on topics, creates content, tests it, revises it, schedules it, publishes it. And that is possible, and it will probably create a bit of output and save you a bit of time. However, that's really not the kind of mindset when it comes to creating agents. And there are still discussions on what the right terminology is. Some people talk about AI armies, some talk about swarms, some just talk about groups. So the the wording isn't quite clear yet. But what is clear is that we will need to readjust our thinking of how we structure processes. So for example, you might have several agents, several hundreds really, that you oversee as an agent boss, as Microsoft just called it a few days ago, where you have your planning agent, you have hundreds of writing agents, you have hundreds of analyzing agents, you have a selection optimization agent that selects certain posts for certain outlets. And then you have, as a human, the choice to go ahead with certain tested posts for different areas. So for example, you have one post for LinkedIn, one for X, one for Blue Sky, one for TikTok, one for Instagram, one for Facebook. And all of those have been tested with synthetic humans by the analyzer and testing agents. So it's a complete change in how we approach these kinds of questions and problems. So what is really the next step is to think of how good can these agents be in helping us solve difficult problems. And what has been found is that seems to be something similar to Moore's law for AI agents. So Gordon Moore in 1965 came up with this law that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit, for example, a CPU or GPU, should be about doubling every 2 years. And that was true for decades. So, and what has now been found is actually in the early years of AI and generative AI is this exponential growth of AI agent capabilities. So this research group called META, it's a nonprofit organization based in Berkeley, they created a set of 170 real-world tasks for coding, cybersecurity issues, general reasoning, machine learning, and they established a baseline to determine how long would it take a real human expert to complete each task. And they call that the task completion time horizon. So their hypothesis was the time needed for task completion serves as an excellent proxy for task difficulty, right? So the harder the task, the longer it takes to solve it. Sure. They then tested the various AI models dating back to OpenAI's GPT-2 that no one has ever heard of, I think, in 2019, and really tried to understand how difficult can the tasks be that these models solve. And what they found is that model in 2019 was able to solve tasks that would require a human 2 seconds. The GPT-4 in 2023 was able to handle tasks requiring a human 4 minutes. And then in 2025, early 2025, a few weeks ago, Claude 3.0 Sonnet can now complete tasks that would take a human around 1 hour. There was a follow-up study just a few days ago that tested the even more recent models that found a continuation of that trend. So what we are seeing is an exponential growth in AI agent capabilities. If you were to project this trend, and there's obviously huge concerns around data protection based on very small samples, we might see agents handling day-long tasks themselves by 2027, or perhaps even month-long tasks by 2030. So, but then the question becomes, so why isn't everyone just doing this, right? And there is this huge agent adoption gap. And again, this is a graph or graphic that was created by ChatGPT. I gave it all the data and all the kind of things that I want to cover in this slide. And I said, well, come up with an infographic to cover that. And it came up with that. There was like a one prompt to design this graph here. And there's lots of stuff wrong with this, but I still think it's a nice way to illustrate this. And the problems are plentiful, right? So it's about pricing. These models still seem to be really, really expensive and often very difficult to price, about integration with existing systems, about data connectivity in general. But two things are really interesting. One is around accuracy and reliability. And it really is about this concern around hallucinations. So a model, an AI model, often hallucinates, which is a fancy word for saying it makes stuff up. And that's obviously problematic if you give it critical tasks. However, as humans, it has been found we are making mistakes, right? So that's not a surprise. But we are very, very strict in terms of accepting failure from an AI compared to accepting failure or mistakes by a human. We have no acceptance for failure by an AI, but we are quite forgiving when it comes to humans making mistakes. So, but that also relates to the next point, the market readiness. So there's a huge amount of training and change management needed before an organization can adopt agents. And that's really holding, all of that combined is really holding back. why there is not a huge adoption and a huge productivity boost yet. The other really big thing is that I think we have to change how we think about AI. And that comes in terms of we often use it as a replacement for Google. So we type in a question and then we are a bit disappointed by its output. Then often we are also thinking, well, this will take away my job, so I'm not using it. And as often the first question that I get is, will AI take our jobs? And in December, I wrote a short piece on that for the conversation, arguing, no, that's really not what is going to happen. It's not really that the AI will magically enter the workplace and take away your job. It's really about a process, right? So if you as an employee are using it and someone else is not, or vice versa, the person using AI is very likely to take your job. The organization that is using AI will have a competitive advantage and potentially endanger your success as a company or an organization if you're not using it. So it's more of a competitive advantage for those that are using it on an individual, but also on an organizational level. So you still need to adapt to this new reality, but it's not that the AI will just magically come in and take jobs. So I think the real future of work is really not a zero-sum game of replacement. It is the question between augmentation versus automation. And it's about human and AI collaboration. And what we are constantly seeing, for example, there's a very interesting study that was published by Microsoft called The Frontier Firm just about 6 days ago, where they ran a huge survey on how people are using AI, is that people use AI for capabilities that humans cannot provide. Right? So, for example, 24/7 access to creativity on a huge scale, right? And lots of different use cases. So what we see is this constant feedback loop between these tools and human. And what Microsoft argues, and I think it's a very, very good paper, and I highly recommend to read that, is we will see a phased adoption of AI agents in organizations. So we will start with AI being a personal assistant, and that's what we are seeing already. There's huge uptake in ChatGPT and other models. The next step is likely that we will have human agent teams, so a human managing number of agents. And then there will potentially be a shift and a completely new structure. That means we have to completely rethink how processes are done in an organization. And Microsoft suggests, well, we will probably have a third department next to HR, IT, and intelligence resources. So there is a new department that is managing all of these agents for an organization. If that's happening, it's very uncertain, but I think it gives us a good framework to think of this. So, but what does that mean now for the humans? What does that mean for us as people working? And what is interesting is the key skills that we used to think are important are still important. It's about effective communication, delegation, iteration, effective communication and managing and delegation of tasks for your team. It's about redefining output and really critically assessing the output of the agents. Or is it that we are still doing the same thing, but we're just talking to agents now and not to other humans? And what are the implications of all of that? So there's so much to unpick there. So, and when I was preparing this talk a few weeks ago for a different setting, I was in a training preparing this talk, and I came across this paper that was released that morning and was called Measuring Human Leadership Skills with AI Agents. And it was a fantastic paper, just a working paper that was recently released. And long story short is what they found is that by conducting a very nicely set up test was that human to AI leadership skills correlate with human to human skills. So what that means is successful leaders showed similar patterns of behavior regardless of whether they were leading humans or AI. They asked more questions, engaged in more conversations, in turn-taking, created balanced dialogue rather than just dominating a conversation. And these leaders also scored, these leaders also scored higher on measures of social intelligence, fluid intelligence, and decision-making skills. And that's very reassuring for us as educators and for us as potentially managers and people working in an organization, is that the skills that we might have developed and that we are teaching at the business school are still very important. Just the person or the thing we will be managing might change quite dramatically over the next 5 to 10 years. And then another paper appeared about a week ago, and it's called The Cybernetic Teammate. And again, a great paper led by Ethan Mollick and others, where they worked with professionals in Procter & Gamble. And they employed a 2x2 design for this experiment, where participants worked either individually or in cross-functional pairs. So a pair of R&D person, or research and development, and commercial staff. They had to complete product innovation tasks, either with or without Gen AI assistance. And three key findings emerged in this one. So the first one was performance. Individual with AI matched the quality of traditional two-person teams without AI. Teams with AI demonstrate the highest performance. In both AI conditions, completed tasks faster and more comprehensively. Most notably, AI-augmented teams were 3 times more likely to produce exceptional solutions in the top quality decile. And all of that was judged by real humans. Second, and I think that was one of the key findings for me personally, was the expertise boundaries. So without AI, R&D staff produced technically oriented solutions, while commercial staff, you guessed it, created market-focused proposals. So and this created really a bimodal distribution of solution types. With AI, however, these functional silos started to disappear, and we found a more unimodal distribution of solutions. So they delivered more balanced solutions, integrating multiple perspectives when they were working together with an AI model. And then lastly, the emotional response. So the prediction here was the use of AI really is degrading workplace experience because we don't like talking to an AI. But the opposite happened. What they found was a very strong correlation between positive emotions and decreased negative emotions when working with this AI partner. So, and this research really compels organizations to consider team sizes, expertise development, how collaboration is happening in the workplace. And it really suggests that AI adoption at scale will not only shape performance, but also how we work together as humans. And I found this a really interesting and a fascinating result. So we had now 3 kind of research papers, right? So we had the Microsoft survey with 30,000 or so participants. We had the example from Procter & Gamble here, and we had the other lab experiment. So, but is anyone doing this in reality? And the answer is yes. So just 3 weeks ago, the CEO of Shopify said, okay, I shared this memo internally, but apparently it was leaked. So here it is. You can all look at it. And he, in this memo, is introducing his AI first policy at Shopify. And just yesterday, Duolingo did the same thing. So more and more companies, large companies, are implementing a very different approach to AI. And one quote really stands out from Toby Lutke. He says, before any team at Shopify may request additional headcount or budget, it must demonstrate that the task cannot be performed by AI or an autonomous AI agent. So effectively what he says is, we stop hiring until you can demonstrate there isn't an AI bot that can do the same thing. He then goes on and introduces lots of different tenets around how AI should be used. I gave this whole announcement to Claude and said, okay, can you please create a flowchart, because I really don't understand how this all fits together, and created this beautiful flowchart here on the right-hand side. And effectively what it does, it introduces an AI-first policy at Shopify. So what are the implications if we think that this is introduced in other institutions, other companies as well? So the first one is the power of decisive leadership mandate. And we see that over and over and over again in different organizations. You often have a bottom-up approach where people are coming up with ideas on how to use AI, or you have a top-down approach where the leadership says, okay, we now must go down this route of AI. Often, obviously, a mixed approach is what really works. But what he did was really moving beyond mere suggesting to make AI use it as an option. He made it a baseline requirement. And this is kind of crucial for accelerating change and embedding this new technology very, very rapidly. Second was an AI-first approach to productivity and growth. So the rule to justify human hires only after exploring AI solutions really shifts the focus to augmenting current abilities, right? Because if you have to rethink your current employees and what they can do with AI, that completely changes the way they think about problems. But this also, the third is the necessity of embedding AI into organizational DNA. So true adoption isn't really about tools. It's integrating AI into core processes like performance management, innovation cycle, and making it fundamental part of how work gets done and evaluated. And finally, really, the profound impact this has on evolving talent landscapes. So this shift demands new skills and focused on human AI collaboration and critical thinking, forcing us really to reevaluate. And I think that's very, very important for us as educators. It forces us to reevaluate everything from entry-level roles and career paths to mentorship and focus on how we educate future workforce. So these four interconnected themes really clearly make it visible in the Shopify example, and it highlights critical areas leaders across all industries need to strategically address AI as it continues to shape how we're going to work together. And perhaps just to summarize this, is that agentic AI represents a fundamental shift from traditional automation. We are not talking about automation anymore. We're really talking about a transformation of how we work. And success in this space really requires being bold and innovative, but also being responsible in terms of the governance and how you actually set that up and how you reward the use of this. However, it is important to build a foundation for scaling through careful testing and learning. There are many examples where companies went too quickly and didn't do proper testing, didn't do proper training, and just started a pilot and invested a lot of money and failed really quickly because also, lastly, they didn't prepare their workforce for this, for evolving human AI collaboration. Okay, and all of this is really why I'm so excited about my current job, about building executive education at University of St. Andrews, because this might as well be one of the coolest jobs in higher education at the moment, because all of that, what we just discussed, is really shaping how the future of work will pan out. And it's really for us now to shape that and help individuals to react to it. And we do that by using those tools in the classroom. And that's really the second part of my talk today, is how are we now actually using those tools actively in the teaching that we are doing? So for example, I told you about this Jagged AI Frontier paper, a really cool paper with kind of 3 different learning outcomes there. So in a classroom setting, I would now traditionally present that, explain the setup, and then perhaps, do 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes on what are the 3 key learnings, right? However, now I flip this around. I now use generative AI to create small games, small simulations for my delegates. So assume I have 16 or so delegates in the room. I now pair them up and say, well, everyone or every duo of you is doing one of those challenges. So the first learning is about the AI Frontier Challenge, identifying what kind of tools or what kind of tasks are within the frontier and outside the frontier. The second one is, how do I actually work together? Am I a centaur or a cyborg? That is discussed in the paper. I won't go into detail here. And the third one is really, how do you transform your organization? What are the kind of steps that you take? Right? So I design games and simulations for my students and for the delegates in executive education, and they can then go through this and really experience it rather than me teaching them and talking through them to them. They can find it out for themselves, right? They also, by doing that, really understand, oh, wait, here's a new way of exploring a topic, right? And then it's not necessarily about what happens then in the simulation. It's really about what happens in the classroom afterwards, right? So we have 16 people that all experienced this interesting simulation, and they now, after 10 minutes or so, come back to the classroom, and then we have an amazing discussion about, okay, was that good? Was that bad? Was it really relevant for you? Have you experienced something similar? What does this, make you consider in terms of how you can perhaps present something in a different way? And we have amazing conversation then in the classroom, which is just a great experience for myself as a teacher, but also for all the people in the room. The same is true with case studies. So case studies have been around, and no disrespect to colleagues from Harvard Business School, I think they have been doing a great job with these case studies, but they quickly become quite one-dimensional. But by building simulations now based on these case studies, we all of a sudden can bring them a bit more to life. So for this one, I used a publicly available case study from Ivy Business School, and I created a simulation that guides the learner through the case study, guides the learner through different decisions that are required to solve that problem of that clothing company. And again, it's not about if that's a completely realistic picture of what is happening in that company. It's really about the learner engaging with the material in a very, very different way than just reading something and then trying to pretend we are going through this. We can now actually simulate going through this. So we can take it a step further. So you can do this for all the kind of situations that you might be faced with as a leader, as a manager, as an employee. So you can use generative AI as a coach, a mediator, a negotiator. You can use it as your boss and come up with ideas on how to manage your boss. So you can really give large language models, personas, and complex prompts, scenarios, and instruct them to play with you through those scenarios. And the learning experience is just phenomenal when you do that. For example, you might use it to simulate a negotiation for a pay rise. You might also simulate a boardroom discussion, right? So assume you're a senior executive, you're responsible for an IT department or for any kind of department really, and you're invited to the boardroom and you are supposed to deal with the latest announcement around EDI policies. Or assume you have to go to a conversation with your CIO on the risk of new Chinese AI models, like we currently are seeing in a lot of companies happening when Manus was released and DeepSeek was released. Or, hypothetically, you could prepare a session on managing a company's reaction to the introduction of tariffs. And this is how I would use it. So I would come up and say, you know what, dear ChatGPT, I'm planning this session on executive education, for executive education, how a company might react to the introduction of tariffs. Can you please come up, I don't use please here, but I need a detailed research report on how different scenarios may play out. The agent, so this is agentic AI, then gets back to me and said, oh, great idea. So I have a few follow-up questions before I go and do this for you. So what kind of specific tariffs are we talking about? What's the time frame for the scenario planning? What kind of sectors? What kind of scenarios in terms of government and regulatory responses? And should we really already talk about different company functions, or what do you want from me? That's the response that ChatGPT gave me. And then I said, effectively, just do everything, right? Make this a very good report, go into detail. Then the AI comes back and said, okay, well, I think I understand. I will go now and do this. I will let you know once I'm done. It then goes away and you can follow its thinking process for 12 minutes in this case. It reads 25 high quality sources, gives you all the sources. I checked all the sources and it comes up with a report of 16,500 words. That's about 30 to 35 pages. So I now have a 35-page report on how the different tariffs in the different regions affect each other and how it might affect different companies from different regions, which is just a phenomenal preparation for me and then going into the course and being able to teach. However, I can also use this now and build customized simulations for everyone in the room, right? So if I have a group of students, if I have a group of delegates from 15 different companies, I can let this run for 15 different companies and have a very detailed report about a current issue for that company, right? And what I can do is I can say, you know what, we are going to design hyper-personalized learning experience for every individual. So for example, I have someone from Deutsche Bank there, product manager. I have someone from Volkswagen. I have someone from Barclays. I have someone from NatWest. I have someone from Procter & Gamble. I know their names. I know their positions. I know the kind of hierarchy, or at least the generative AI will know. And if not, it will find out. What I can now do is say, you know what? We have Luke here. Luke Mansfield is the Chief Commercial Officer. He's attending one of my courses. He's with Harley-Davidson. So I now create this customized solution for Luke, for my class, and say, you know what, here's the situation. This is very specific for Luke. And he can now sit down for 10, 15 minutes and together with the AI explore this problem, explore how Harley-Davidson might react to the tariffs and what kind of options they have. So what I did is a bit like a TV chef. I prepared this for you so that we can watch this play out in Claude. So what is happening is I just copy pasted all of this into Claude and said, okay, now let's explore this a bit together. Then Claude says, okay, hi, Luke. And it simulates a conversation between Paul Krause, the Chief Legal and Compliance Officer, and Luke. Luke comes now, the AI comes up with a few options, and then Luke, or in this case myself, because I pretended to be Luke, say, well, I don't really know what to do. I need a bit of guidance, right? And then the AI provides a bit of guidance, and it comes up with different legal options. It comes up with opportunities, and it says, well, here are 5 different things you could do. How about we do all of them, or do you want me to consider one in particular? Then I say, well, you know what? 6 months is very long. We need really short-term options because this is really affecting our business right now, not in 6 months. And then it goes into detail for the different options. Okay, we can do price protection, we can supply chain adjustments, we can, do a petition for the US Commerce Department. And I said, well, let's do all of that. We need to, move really quickly, and we need to do as much as we can to really help us. Can you come up with a plan and how to paralyze this? It then comes up with a week-by-week plan and suggests certain initiatives. And I won't go into detail, right? And that I am not an expert for what happens at Harley-Davidson. This is the experience for Luke Mansfield, not for us, right? So it comes up with very different and detailed plans for all of that and suggests next steps. So what I then say as Luke, okay, you know what? Create these documents for me. I need something that I can take out of my executive education course now, that I take away on Friday. I go back to my CEO. I report about what an amazing experience I had at St. Andrews and all the things I learned. But not only that, I get now 5 different documents that the AI creates for me that serve as a starting point. Obviously, this will not be great, right? This will not be the final product, but it provides a rapid response team formation document, a EU dealer support program documentation. It suggests that we do some Thailand inventory redirection protocol, because apparently Harley-Davidson has some big stores in Thailand. It comes up with a strategy, it comes up with a communication plan, and then it comes up with a press release. So what that means is Luke will leave St. Andrews with these documents, with not only a theoretical framework, he will leave with all of this, and then also with the experience of sharing what he just experienced with his 15 classmates. And that's really where the value is then added, because we will have 15 people who have just experienced this kind of new way of learning, and they want to share. They want to say, okay, this really was amazing. This wasn't too amazing. That's really unrealistic. So then you have a fantastic conversation in the classroom. And that just makes it so great for me to be then able to teach these individuals and explore this further. And this is really what I think St. Andrews is about this personal learning experience. But this is now a new way of creating a very personal learning experience in the modern era. And I'm just so excited to be able to shape that. So, and where and how do we do this? We do this for lots of different courses. So let me just check. So there we go. At the moment, we have 8 different courses, and we're trying to implement this across all of our courses, because I strongly believe that we need to be able to teach differently, to learn differently, and to work differently. And I'm just super excited to be able to share this with you today, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to discussing this further. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Craig.
Thanks very much, Marcel. That was great. There was a lot covered there over a short space of time. So there's really, you can tell it's really piqued people's interest by the quality and the number of questions that are coming through. So thank you very much for that. But I'll start off with, so I have a question myself first, whilst everyone's cogitating and getting their questions in, but please do continue to ask them and we'll get through as many as we can. there's a bit of a split in the questions between people being really excited about AI and about new applications, and also about the ethics of it. But I'll ask you the first one is for the people that are excited. If I've not started using any tools yet, which ones should I use? And someone in the questions, Alessia, specifically asked, what agent AI tool did you use?
Yeah, great question. And I think I should answer in two ways. First of all, if you're using it as a private person, then I think it doesn't make a huge difference. I would usually go for one of the paid versions, because often the performance of those is much better than the free versions, and also the data privacy concerns are often addressed by actually paying for the service. So, and then I think ChatGPT or Claude offer some of the best experiences. If you want to go down the route of agentic behavior, for example, this deep research feature that I introduced there, where the agent goes away and does a research report for you, that's currently only available in ChatGPT globally and in Google's Gemini. So those are probably the things also in terms of agentic starting points that you might explore. However, if you're working in organizations, I should say you need to check your policies around that. So a huge concern is that people are going away and using models that are not vetted, that are not secure. There's huge issues around data leakage and data security. So for example, at the University of St. Andrews, we are using Microsoft, and we are currently exploring to use Copilot, which is the generative AI solution. And that then is a safe environment. One of the clients we're working with in executive education, the German Stock Exchange, they're exploring different options there. But it's, as you can imagine, it's very, very sensitive data. So if you're working with it, it's very, very important that you're careful about what tools you're using for what purpose, and really making sure that you use the tools that are approved by your organization.
Sure. Thank you very much. Getting more into the kind of societal change side of it, what happens to the entry-level jobs, and how does automating things affect the number of people that we'll see coming through in the more junior roles?
It's a great question. I think it's a very important concern. But also I think that's a really important question that we have to ask ourselves as a university and as educators. And I personally believe is we have to change the approach we have towards educating for entry-level positions, especially around knowledge work. So to give you a specific example, right? So I think we need to completely change the expectations that we have for our students. So when I was teaching on financial technology a few years ago, I gave students a semester to develop a prototype for a financial technology app, right? So I taught them and how to do it and what to consider. Now I give them an hour, and the results are better than 2 years ago, right? So the expectations completely change. And I think the expectations from hiring managers completely change as well. And as educators, we need to be aware of that, and we need to up our game, right? And we need to make sure that we produce graduates that are able to compete in that marketplace. And I think St. Andrews is, in a perfect position to do so. We have amazing colleagues and amazing faculty to do that, but we really have to start with that as educators, because what we are seeing in industry is the hiring freezes, as with the Shopify example, hiring freeze with Duolingo, and that will just continue to happen for entry-level positions. So the only way forward then is to rethink what an entry-level position is, right? And that's really about lifting up the performance of those individuals and really helping them on that journey.
Thanks. You spoke a lot about AI, but I know there's another thing coming down the line, which is the artificial general intelligence. I know there's debate about whether that's reachable or whether we can reach, or how long that will take. But I don't know if you could comment a little bit on that, and whether AGI will have different effects from AI on the future of work. And I think related as well, I've got a question from someone called Julie Marie Lukas, who has asked, can Gen AI learn new things and do creative tasks?
Great. So yeah, no, I think the first one, perhaps to address that one. What is AGI? I think it's a philosophical question, right? So, and I don't want to go into too much detail there, because I think there's really this is a huge question, right? But I think when we think of what's happening already in the marketplace is really that the models that we are now seeing are performing so much better than we would expect a human to perform. So for example, ChatGPT o3 is really doing stuff that we wouldn't expect a human to be able to do, right? So, and I think that also means that we might have to rethink what we mean by AGI. There won't be that one moment where AGI all of a sudden happens, right? That's not going to happen. It's a stepwise process. We won't tomorrow wake up and say, oh, we have discovered AGI. I think we are already at a stage where the tools are doing work that 2 years ago, 3 years ago would have probably satisfied the definition of AGI, right? So I think we are constantly evolving on that question. However, if we want to think that there at some point there will be this AGI thing that is just so much better than any other knowledge work, and we're really only focused on knowledge work, not all the other great things that are happening and do really important jobs. And there was a really interesting essay by Daniel Susskind, a professor in London, where he identifies kind of 3 categories of tasks that even under AGI might resist full machine substitution. So, and he says, well, there's kind of a general equilibrium limit. So a task in which human labor retains a comparative advantage over machines, right? So because it might still be cheaper to do it. There are tasks where humans just prefer to deal with another human. So tasks for which people have a taste or intrinsic preferences for human involvement. And then I think probably one of the most important ones is the moral limits, right? So activities deemed normative or ethical that many believe must include a human in the loop. And I think we will hopefully retain this for many years to come. And then, yeah, I think the second question I think was also interesting. Yes, I think we see that the tasks become more and more complex and that these tools are getting better and better at solving more and more tasks, and that affects everyone, right? So from the very early children. So for example, the Turing Institute is doing a lot of work with how does this whole thing affect children and how they learn, up to CEOs and senior executives in organizations. So yes, absolutely, that is constantly evolving.
Thanks. We've got a very St Andrews specific question that someone has asked, which I'm very pleased about. And it was, will St Andrews Uni be offering AI-related courses to existing students as part of their course offering, given the impact that AI will have on work? So I know you'll be aware of what the business school are doing, but do you know anything about the kind of integration of AI across the syllabus in a more general way?
So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know and I'm aware of that we are working on a policy around that and how do we actually do it. And I think there's amazing examples from people across the university who are already starting to integrate it into their teaching. So just this morning we talked with the School of Medicine and they integrated quite substantially. I know of examples in international relations that are starting to integrate it. A standalone module is difficult, I think. I think we need to think a bit bigger. From my point of view, we need to just do it everywhere. I think it just becomes, you wouldn't now teach without a PowerPoint, or you wouldn't teach without, say, internet research, right? So I think we really shouldn't be teaching AI as a module, but rather use it across the piece and really integrate it, because that's how you're going to work with it in the future as well, how you're going to do research with it and how you're going to do presentations and all that. And I think that's really the approach that we need to follow, is to integrate it across all the domains rather than having a standalone module that becomes outdated very, very quickly, right? So I think it's really about staying ahead of the curve by integrating it across the piece.
Thank you. As you were talking, I jotted down a question of my own that a lot of people have also asked similar things. You mentioned at one point the kind of hallucinations or mistakes that AI can make, and the difference in the level of acceptance that people have for those mistakes versus when a human makes a mistake. But on a broader, kind of more ethical level, where does the responsibility lie for the consequences of AI mistake, or where does the responsibility lie for the mistake that AI makes, and then where does the responsibility lie for the consequences of that? And do we have the legislation in place to deal with that sort of thing yet, or is that playing catch up?
Yeah, and another great question. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to give any kind of legal advice on this one. But perhaps let me start by saying hallucinations are important because hallucinations mean that the model is creative. It comes up with things, right? And that's what the original purpose of these models was. It was supposed to create something, to generate something, right? So generative AI comes from generating content and be creative about it. What you can do in the background and when you're setting up these systems, you can get rid of all of that. You can make it very, very factual, but then the output becomes less and less interesting, right? So hallucinations are important for creativity. So we are now, interpreting hallucinations as a bad thing, but I think actually it's a core functionality. It's a feature, not a bug. But I understand that for certain scenarios, we can't accept that, right? But we had that before, right? This is not new for generative AI. We had self-driving cars, we had fraud detection, we had credit scoring. AI has been around, and it has been, there has been so many initiatives to trying to regulate that field. And I think it's very, very, very difficult, especially considering how fast moving it is. So as far as I know, there isn't any legislation that would be big enough and powerful enough to actually regulate this, and will often come down to the individual companies and to the service providers. And at the moment, I think there's very little in place that enables that, which again will probably hinder the large-scale adoption and the kind of process at some point.
Thank you. We're fast running out of time, so I think I'm going to put a few questions together that people have asked, and you'll be happy to know it's back to the education sector. I've got one person who's asked, they're a study mentor at university across Scotland, and on occasion students have asked for someone to read their essay and give feedback. And of course, all the courses are vastly different, and their knowledge of all university courses only goes so far. Is it ethical to input the essay into AI and ask for AI's feedback and then feedback to the student? And on a kind of broader sense, people are asking just in general about the ethics of students using AI to write their essays and whether that is something that whether a tutor is able to find out whether AI has been used, or on a broader sense, whether that matters.
Right. Let me start with the latter. There is no provable way to say that someone has used it. So in the early days of generative AI, there were these tools that were attempting to do that, and it was quite quickly debunked. It's not statistically possible to prove it. However, the more you work with this and the more student essays you see, the more you get a feel for it, right? So there is a certain way of how AI writes, especially if students or anyone else for that matter are using it just very superficially and not engaging with it. If you are constantly engaging with it, and then if you are using it as a tutor, as a coach for writing, then I think the quality of the essay changes as well. The ethical question, I think, is an interesting one. And I personally think, again, we should make it as an assumption that students are using it because it's a really powerful tool for learning, as I hopefully have demonstrated today. And it's a huge opportunity. So why shouldn't we use one of the biggest learning opportunities and educational opportunities that we have and enable students, especially now that it is free and safe to use across different platforms, if data protection, all of that is in place, right? So as a teacher, as a lecturer, I wouldn't just put a student essay into a free model that is hosted somewhere externally that might include some student identification data or whatever there is in there. So I think that is very difficult, and I think that should be avoided. However, how to give good feedback and use it as a tool in a safe way within the corporate setting, I think there's a huge opportunity to improve student feedback because we might be able to go much deeper in terms of the time invest and so on, if, again, using the right tools and the safe tools. And I think that's a precondition for all of that. But I think I realize we're running out of time. I think this is one of the biggest opportunities for teaching and education in the last decades. And I think we need to use it. And as an industry, we need to drive this and lead on this. And I was super excited to share this today with you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Marcel. We're really glad to have you at St Andrews leading on this and driving this across the university as well. So it's a great pleasure to have you here this evening. So it just nice to me to thank you again for a really thoroughly interesting talk. It's really great to get these insights into the kind of research and passions of our academics. So I would urge you to join us as well for the next Saints talk, which I had previewed at the start, which is on the 27th of May with Julie Oswald of the Scottish Oceans Institute. But finally, I'd like to thank Marcel again, and just to thank all of our students and alumni and friends across the globe who've joined us today to learn so much more from Marcel. So we look forward to seeing you at the next talk. But for now, thanks very much for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your hopefully very sunny evening like it is in St Andrews. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.